The sun hadn't yet breached the jagged spine of Redstone Ridge when Elena Carter pulled her insulated jacket tighter and stepped onto the gravel path leading to the range. The early hour kept most of the compound asleep, except for the faint hum of electric heaters and the occasional clack of a wind vane resetting in the breeze. At 05:32, the Montana sky hung deep and blue above her, a cold hush stretching between the peaks. She moved with silent efficiency, carrying a compact tool roll tucked under one arm. Her boots crunched lightly across the frost-stiffened gravel as she made her way toward the scoring tower. The electronic target sensors had to be recalibrated before the snipers arrived. She preferred it this way. No voices, no questions, just work. Inside the tower, she ran a diagnostic on the scoring interface. 2 sensors on lane 4 reported latency above threshold. She opened the maintenance panel, tracing wires without hesitation, her gloved fingers deft with the connectors. Outside, a gust of wind swept through the valley, rattling the tower frame. Elena paused, watching how the flags flared and snapped. The crosswinds had shifted earlier than usual. She noted it in her log. By 06:10, she had made her way to the farthest wind meter, the one closest to the 1,500-meter target. It stood against the backdrop of distant ridges, where sunrise would soon edge the snowcaps in gold. She pulled the casing off, cleaned the bearing with a cloth, and replaced the battery without breaking rhythm. Her hands worked while her mind scanned the landscape, the angle of trees, the push of air over the slope. No one ever asked what she saw out here. At 06:32, the peace broke. The first Humvee growled up the access road, headlights sweeping across the range. Another followed close behind, then a third. Soldiers stepped out in 2s and 3s, laughing, tossing their bags to the ground. Voices bounced off the rock faces. Commands. Teasing. Bravado. Elena stepped back from the lane and returned to her kit. Eyes lowered. Lieutenant Logan Riker exited last. Tall, squared shoulders, and hair too perfect for regulations. He walked like he knew who he was: sharpshooter, team leader, top scorer in the program. He laughed easily and loudly, the center of gravity in every room, even when outdoors. He spotted Elena as he passed and gave a smirk, but didn't speak. Master Sergeant Dana Lewis followed more quietly, clipboard in hand, steps purposeful. She surveyed the area without flash, eyes missing nothing. She gave Elena a small nod as she passed. Elena returned it, barely. At 06:55, the team began setting up for their morning drills. Riker's voice carried over the range as he barked instructions, cracked jokes, corrected stances. The sound of bolts racking echoed in staggered rhythm as the shooters loaded their magazines. Elena, meanwhile, adjusted a scope mount on Riker's personal rifle, careful not to over-tighten the ring. It was a custom M2010 ESR, fine-tuned to his shooting style. She could see it needed a subtle offset on the rear elevation. She made the change without saying a word. Riker walked by again at 07:12, sunglasses on despite the early haze. He didn't look at her, but she heard the undercurrent in his words as he called to a teammate. Probably cost more than her truck. The others laughed. Elena didn't flinch. She moved from station to station, checking optics, marking calibration points, resetting pressure sensors near the 1,000-meter berm. A junior shooter accidentally stepped into her workspace and mumbled an apology. She nodded once, resumed her work. It was easier that way. At 07:48, Lewis gathered the team near the field table. Today's drill would cover high-angle shooting and unknown distance estimation. Elena stood off to the side, logging wind data from 4 sensors into the weather interface. No one asked her what she thought of the swirling downdrafts that had just started to build between sectors 3 and 5. She entered the readings, saved the file, and backed away. The ridge swallowed voices as they climbed in pitch. Targets were placed, drones were readied to record impact visuals, and rifles lined up along the mat like chrome vertebrae. Elena found herself back near the tower, checking sync time between target flashes and the remote feed. Her headset beeped as one relay missed a pulse. She corrected it in less than 15 seconds. By 08:05, the sun cracked the eastern ridgeline. Golden light swept across the range and lit Elena's face for the first time. She didn't turn from her task. She tapped in the wind shift reading at 7.3 mph, noting the change in gust intervals. Behind her, the team focused scopes downrange, oblivious to the woman who had already predicted the conditions they would soon blame. She stepped back as Lewis walked past again, their eyes meeting for a breath. The sergeant's glance lingered just long enough to register recognition. Then she moved on. Elena finished her checks and retreated to the edge of the range. Toolkit closed, gloves folded into her jacket pocket. No one noticed her leave. No one ever did. And that was the point. The morning drills were in full swing by 08:27, the sound of rifle bolts locking and magazine seating filling the crisp air. Elena Carter stood behind firing lane 2, crouched beside the massive Barrett M107A1 resting on its bipod. Her fingers moved with precision as she adjusted the scope's windage knob, checking the turret resistance and verifying the zero from the previous calibration. The light reflected sharply off the matte finish of the rifle's upper receiver. Lieutenant Riker strolled over, hands in his pockets, watching her without greeting. He was already wearing his custom shooting gloves, the kind stitched with reinforced knuckles and personalized initials. He let the silence stretch before saying anything. "That's a lot of rifle for someone who just tightens bolts, don't you think?" Elena didn't look up. She continued adjusting the ocular ring, checking parallax alignment. She was used to remarks that didn't need answers. He knelt beside her, closer now, his voice dropping just enough to stay out of range of the others. "Ever even fired one of these, or do you just babysit them?" She paused, only for a second. Her gloved hand froze above the adjustment knob. Then she reset her grip and turned the dial precisely one notch. "Just maintain them, sir. That's what I'm here for." Riker let out a soft laugh and stood, loud enough now for the team to hear. He added, "I'd trust a windsock before I'd trust half these scope calibrations. No offense." A few chuckles echoed from behind the barricade where the other shooters were cleaning their rifles. No one said anything in her defense, not even Lewis, who stood further back, watching with that neutral stillness she always kept. Elena locked the final setting, slid the scope cover on, and gently stepped back. She nodded toward the rifle. "The zero's clean. You're good to go." Riker picked up the Barrett like it was a personal artifact, examining the optic as if he expected to find something wrong. He said nothing, just shouldered it, aligned it to the sandbag rest, then shifted back. She was already packing her tools. As she moved toward the next station, one of the junior shooters muttered something Elena couldn't catch. Another snicker followed, faint, but pointed. She didn't react. Her face remained expressionless, eyes focused on the next wind meter. But her shoulders were just slightly stiffer, her grip on the screwdriver one notch tighter. Behind her, Riker settled into firing position, unaware that the very adjustment he questioned had just corrected a barely visible deviation. He wouldn't notice. He never had. At 08:34, Elena stepped into the shadow of the control shed, quiet as always, and no one turned to watch her go. The morning sun hung low behind the western ridgeline as the team moved into position for their 1,500-meter drill. At 09:11, a steady wind from the northwest had settled into the valley, brushing against the steel targets like breath over glass. Elena Carter stood just off the firing line, clipboard in hand, quietly logging wind intervals and thermal readings from sensors positioned along the slope. Lieutenant Riker lay prone behind the Barrett M107A1, cheek pressed to the stock, eyes locked through the optic. He exhaled, adjusted his grip, and fired. The echo of the round rolled across the terrain. A half-second later, the target remained still. No ring, no hit. He cursed under his breath and pulled the bolt back to chamber a new round. Resetting his aim, he fired again. The spotter called out, "Miss, high left!" "Something's wrong with this scope," Riker muttered, lifting his head. That was clean. Zeroed yesterday. He sat up on his elbows, frustration simmering just under the surface. From where she stood, Elena had already noted the wind shift. The cross-current had begun spiraling behind the far ridge. typical for this time of day. The thermal pocket forming above the brush line could bend trajectory just enough to cause what Riker had seen. She hesitated, then spoke evenly. "Sir, the wind pattern's changed past the second ridge. There's a downdraft curving left across your line of fire." Riker turned his head slowly. The sarcasm came easy. "Appreciate the input, but I think I know how to read a flag." "Thanks." The junior spotter looked up from his scope, half expecting more, but no one said a word. Elena returned to her notes, making a quiet mark at 0914 for the velocity dip at lane 5. Her face gave nothing away, but her pencil pressed harder than before. Riker tried again. Third shot. Still off. He clicked his tongue and adjusted his scope, refusing to consider the possibility that the rifle wasn't the problem. Behind the line. Sergeant Lewis stood with arms crossed, watching everything. She hadn't missed the exchange, nor the way Elena had spoken unemotional, precise, and absolutely correct. Elena moved on, walking toward the next sensor station without turning back. She paused to adjust a bent wind vane, tightening the base bolt with measured force. Her eyes flicked toward the ridgeline just once, noting the way the dust curled midair. Nearly invisible, unless you knew what to look for. Riker muttered something under his breath. Lewis didn't respond. She followed Elena's path with her gaze for a moment longer before shifting her focus back to the firing line. At 0917, Elena logged the last reading and stepped behind the observation tent, unseen once again. The next round cracked downrange, still missing center mass, and the wind kept curving. At 10:03, the NATO delegation arrived in a black suburban convoy. Doors opened with diplomatic precision, and a cluster of military observers stepped onto the range platform, flanked by a civilian State Department liaison. Flags on their sleeves, British, German, French. Polish fluttered gently in the light wind that had begun shifting across the valley floor. Major Hale stood waiting at the firing line, posture squared, voice steady as he welcomed them. Redstone Ridge was under inspection. The U.S. team was there to perform. By 10:11, the team was in full gear. Spotters set up their scopes behind the mats. Rifles were pre-positioned and loaded under supervision. Elena Carter stood near the far sensor station, half shielded behind the control tent, logging temperature drift and pressure anomalies from a handheld device. The wind had begun rotating above the second ridge, a pattern she recognized. It would bend shots left, then sharply down in the final stretch past 1,600 meters. No one asked. Lieutenant Riker was first to the line. His Barrett M107A1 rested on a bipod. The 1,800-meter steel target shimmered in the sun, barely visible without optics. At 10:17, Hale gave the go. Riker's body settled flat. He fired. The shot cracked across the range. No ring. Miss. Riker didn't flinch. He loaded a second round, fired again, missed slightly low. One of the German officers murmured something, scribbling into a notebook. Riker adjusted his scope. Shot 3. Miss. Left of target. He pulled back from the stock and cursed softly. Major Hale shifted his stance behind the line, jaw set tight. Sergeant Lewis, crouched near the tablet receiving shot data, didn't say a word. Elena had stepped closer now, reviewing wind data from 3 synced meters in the valley basin. Her reading showed a late morning spiral starting to form. At 10:22, Riker called out, "Carter, get over here. Something's off with this optic." Elena approached calmly, removed her gloves, and took the rifle without hesitation. She ran a quick check mount, turret caps, ocular alignment. Everything was intact. Scopes clean. "Sir, you've got a spiraling wind pushing off the second ridgeline. It's dragging left at 700 yards and shifting downward near the target face." Riker squinted at her. "Appreciate the classroom time. Just fix the gear." She offered the rifle back, stepping away without expression. At 10:24, Riker fired again. Another miss. Behind him, the NATO observers leaned back from their optics. A few exchanged quiet glances. Hale looked to Lewis, who gave a slight shake of her head. Lewis, however, had tracked more than bullet paths. She'd watched the way Elena read the wind without instruments. How she adjusted without guesswork. It wasn't a guess. It was known. By 10:29, the fourth shooter missed as well. One landed near the edge. The others drifted clean past. The demo was falling apart. Elena moved back toward her station, invisible as always. She didn't smile, didn't frown, but she knew exactly where the bullets had gone, and exactly why they never hit. At 10:33, a sharp double tone buzzed through the commnet. The range officer's voice followed, clipped and clear. All personnel, stand by. Possible drone incursion. Repeat. Unconfirmed aerial breach east quadrant. Lockdown visual assets. Prepare to clear. Major Hale pivoted from the NATO group without hesitation, issuing hand signals as security protocols kicked in. The foreign delegates were quickly pulled into the covered briefing hut by a pair of MPs. No panic, just sharp movement and fast compliance. The wind still spiraling off the ridge, rustled the flags as rifles were shouldered and spotting scopes folded down. By 10:36, most of the firing line had emptied. The observers were escorted downrange access road 2, out of sight in less than 2 minutes. Elena Carter remained near the control tower, unplugging the uplink from the sensor hub. She worked fast, calm. Nobody told her to move. No one noticed she hadn't. Near the benches, one weapon hadn't been touched. The Barrett M107A1, its bipod still braced, stock pressed neatly against the mat, the barrel aligned at 3,200 meters. The long steel silhouette target stood like a ghost on the far slope, shimmering faintly in the midday heat. At 10:39, the radios crackled again. Range Team 2 is sweeping the eastern edge. No visual. Maintain lockdown until further clearance. The field was quiet now. Elena stood beside the control table, watching the empty firing lane. Her gloves were still tucked in her belt. Wind tugged lightly at her collar. Every other sound had faded, the voices, the tension, the clutter of movement. She walked toward the bench, slow and deliberate. The rifle's bolt was open, chamber clear. A single round rested in a tray beside it, glinting softly in the sun. She reached for the charging handle, paused, then rested her hand instead on the stock. The grip felt familiar, balanced, solid. A hum echoed in the pit of her stomach, not nerves, but memory. She looked downrange. The distance between her and the steel plate felt impossibly far to anyone who didn't know the air, but she knew how the ridgeline channeled the draft between the breaks in the rock, how that thin line of dust curling across the floor wasn't random, but clue. At 10:42, the silence was absolute. She leaned in slightly, one eye aligning just shy of the scope. She didn't look through it. Not yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and breathed, felt the valley, let the chill roll in over her shoulders. The rifle waited, unassuming. No one was there to ask why she hadn't left. No one to tell her she shouldn't know what she did. And still, her hand hovered near the bolt, not touching, just remembering. At 10:44, the last sweep call crackled over the radio. All clear, false alarm, resume standard protocol. Elena Carter stood alone at the edge of lane 6. No voices, no commands, just the sound of wind slipping across the valley and the long, unbroken line between her and the 3,200-meter steel target. She didn't hesitate, not this time. She stepped behind the Barrett M107A1 with quiet certainty. No wasted movement. Left hand under the forend, right hand settling around the grip. Her body flattened behind the rifle, not stiff, but locked with intent. Her cheek found the stock like it had 1,000 times before. She didn't look around. She looked through. The scope captured everything heat shimmer off the earth, mirage dancing just beyond the reticle, a faint flag movement near the third ridge break. She adjusted elevation, 4 full rotations, windage 3 clicks right. She accounted for spin drift, drop, and pressure. No spotter, no range card, just instinct and memory. She slowed her breathing. 3 seconds in, 3 out. The world narrowed. At 10:46, her finger tightened over the trigger. The recoil was clean, precise. The massive rifle kicked back, hard but controlled. She rolled with it, back to position in one fluid motion. A beat. Then, from beyond the far hill, a metallic ping echoed across the valley like a church bell at distance. The 3,200-meter target had been hit, dead center. Two junior spotters still nearby turned, eyes wide. One had been prepping gear, the other had frozen mid-step, mouth slightly open. Neither moved, neither spoke. At 10:47, Sergeant Lewis stepped back onto the range with three others behind her, voices fading as they caught sight of the still settling dust trail behind Elena. The look on Lewis's face changed slowly. First confusion, then calculation, then something else. Something close to respect. No one said a word. Elena stood slowly, unslinging herself from the rifle. She reached down, cleared the chamber, and set the bolt back. Her gloves still hung from her belt. Her breathing was calm, her face unreadable. More personnel began drifting back onto the field. Eyes followed her, even Riker's. He hadn't seen the shot, but he saw the expression on Lewis's face and the silence from the spotters who had. At 10:49, Elena turned, walked back toward the equipment tent, and picked up the toolkit she'd left an hour before. No one asked how she'd done it. Not yet. But something had changed, and every one of them knew it. At 10:51, Major Hale stepped forward, his boots crunching lightly on the gravel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That shot wasn't luck, he said. Then he looked directly at Elena. I knew I'd seen that form before. Sangin Province, 2012, Southern Helmand. A ripple passed through the NATO observers. One of them leaned toward another and whispered. A name surfaced barely audible at first, then repeated with quiet certainty. The ghost of Sangin. Elena didn't move. She kept one hand on the edge of the table, eyes steady. She said nothing, offered no correction, no protest. Hale turned to the rest of the team. 20 Marines were pinned down that day, 2 LAVs disabled. The insurgents had crossfire set from the high wall above the canal, no air support, no comms. She took a shot through wind and heat mirage at 2,800 meters, nailed the spotter, broke the line. They got out because of her. A silence fell. Not the usual silence of surprise, but one that carried weight, the kind that rewrote the way people looked at a person standing still. Elena let the moment pass without expression. The recognition didn't seem to comfort her. If anything, it made her smaller, not ashamed, not proud, just distant. Riker opened his mouth, then closed it. Major Hale looked to Lewis, who was already watching Elena with something deeper than curiosity, something like understanding. Elena turned, picked up a wind sensor from the bench, and carried it to the shed. No fanfare, no medals, just the name, now said aloud. The ghost of Sangin, and now, the tech from Redstone Ridge. At 11:12, the range had mostly cleared again. The observers were gone. Riker was nowhere in sight. Only Lewis stood beside Elena near the bench, saying nothing, not pushing, just waiting. Elena didn't look up. She was kneeling by the wind case, folding cables in careful loops. Then, slowly, she spoke. It was supposed to be clean. Intel flagged a weapons trafficker coordinating IED cells across 2 districts. Command said we had one chance, one shot. Target was mobile. Timing was tight. But I had the window. Her voice was steady, but every pause felt heavier than the last. He was standing on the roof of a brick compound. I had to adjust for a heat mirage cutting across the rooftop line. It looked clear. I waited for movement. I fired. She stood, coiling the last wire with a slow breath. Target dropped. Spotter confirmed. Marines moved. Everyone made it out. I didn't find out until days later that the intel packet had holes. The room below him held 3 people who weren't part of anything. 2 women, 1 child. All gone. The silence after that didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. Lewis said nothing. I wasn't court-martialed. No inquiry. They said it was war. Fog of it. I was up for a medal. Letters came. The brass offered PR handlers, interviews. even a position as an instructor at Quantico. I didn't want any of it. Elena finally looked at Lewis. Not angry, just tired. It wasn't guilt. I don't regret stopping that ambush. 23 people walked away because of that shot. But every time someone thanked me or called me a hero, I could still see that rooftop. She looked downrange again, toward the slope where her bullet had landed minutes earlier. So, I packed up and left. Changed my name on half the forms, applied as a civilian tech, took the jobs no one wanted: calibration, repair, field support, stayed invisible, figured it was better if I just kept the systems running. Let the next person take the shot. Lewis folded her arms but didn't move. Her voice was low. You never missed that day. Elena nodded once. That was the problem. There was no bitterness in her tone, no drama, just a truth she had lived with every day since. At 11:16, she shut the wind case, latched it, and stood up. The story was told. Nothing left to defend, nothing to prove, just gravity, wind, and memory. At 11:20, the range was nearly still again. The flags hung limp. The gravel didn't crunch beneath boots anymore. Elena sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on her knees, staring out across the empty valley. Sergeant Lewis stayed nearby, leaning against a post without speaking. Then, quietly, she asked, "Why today?" Elena didn't answer right away. She glanced at her gloves folded neatly beside her, then looked up at the ridge where the air still shimmered faintly. Because they were all trying so hard, she said, all morning, every shot, every adjustment. They wanted to hit it, but they didn't know how. I did. Lewis didn't nod. She didn't speak, just listened. Elena's voice was quiet. I kept thinking someone else would fix it, someone higher ranked, someone with orders. But when they cleared the range and left that rifle out, I realized no one else was coming. She looked down at her hands, palms calloused, fingers still steady. And maybe after all these years, not doing it hurt more than stepping forward. Not because I wanted credit, just because I finally stopped pretending I wasn't who I am. Lewis shifted her weight slightly, arms still crossed. That was all Elena needed. No praise, no judgment. The wind picked up again, a light gust brushing through the field. At 11:23, Elena stood, grabbed the sensor case, and walked it back toward the shed, slower this time, not hiding, not shrinking. The shot was behind her. The silence after it had changed nothing around her, but something inside had moved, and it wasn't going back. At 11:38, the range was mostly reset. Targets stood ready, optics cleaned, ammo staged. The wind had calmed, the tension hadn't returned. Lieutenant Riker walked back in from the far side. No one called him. No one followed. He moved with less swagger than usual. His eyes searched the line, then stopped at Elena, who was kneeling beside a case of tools, sorting sensor heads. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, waiting. Elena looked up. He held his Barrett by the carry handle, muzzle pointed low. Then, quietly, he set it on the bench in front of her. His hand lingered a second longer than necessary. I was wrong, he said, about you, about everything. Elena didn't reply. She didn't have to. The silence said it had been heard. I keep chasing the math, Riker continued, dialing it in like it's a puzzle. You saw it in seconds, like it was muscle memory. Elena stood, reached for the rifle, checked the torque on the rail mounts, eyed the cheek rest position, ran her fingers over the windage turret. You're overcompensating left drift at 700. That's why your crosswind at long range collapses. You're chasing a mirage echo, not the real wind. Your glass isn't wrong. Your baseline is. Riker nodded slowly. That makes sense. No sarcasm, no defensiveness, just listening. Behind them, two younger team members approached, quietly at first. One of them nodded to Elena. The other held a spotter tablet. We heard what happened earlier. Thought maybe you could show us how you read the spiral in the valley. We keep misreading the second layer wind. Elena looked at them, then at Riker, who gave a small gesture. Go ahead. She stepped toward the edge of the bench and knelt beside the gear. She picked up a laminated topo overlay and began tracing contour lines with her finger. You see that break at 1600? That's where the valley floor curves hard east. The draft doesn't stop, it climbs. That's why your impact points drop low, even when your flags say crosswind. The two men leaned in, focused. No interruptions, no eye rolling. At 11:45, Lewis joined them, arms crossed, watching. Behind her, another pair approached. Elena glanced at the group, then back at the map. She didn't change her voice or slow her movements. But something had shifted. No longer the invisible one, no longer the quiet tech in the corner. Now, Elena stood at the center of the circle, holding the rifle in the knowledge, and they listened. At 1812, long after the range had gone quiet, Major Hale found Elena near the edge of the equipment shed. He didn't bring a folder. He didn't speak in command tone, just a quiet offer. NATO was forming a joint sniper instruction cadre for the Baltic deployment. They needed someone who could teach what couldn't be taught in manuals. Hale had only one name in mind. Elena listened without interrupting. Then she nodded once. I'll do it. But no title, no press release, and no camera crews. I show up. I train. That's it. Hale smiled. Understood. The next morning at 07:30, the wind had picked up again. A cold bite cut across Redstone Ridge, but the line was already full. Not with rifles, with people. The entire team stood in formation, not parade rest, just present, waiting. Elena walked to the front slowly. No clipboard, no salute. She set her range tablet on a steel drum and clicked it on. We're going to start with wind theory, she said. Real wind, the kind that doesn't show up on charts. No one interrupted. No one glanced away. She moved to the whiteboard, sketching a valley cross-section, marking points of thermal updraft and cross-shear. The team followed her every line, even Riker, who stood at the back, arms crossed, nodding quietly. She didn't raise her voice, didn't change cadence. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't formal, but it was complete. She wasn't just back. She was leading. At 05:47, the first light touched Redstone Ridge in a thin line of gold along the frost-dusted benches. Elena walked the gravel path with measured steps, one hand gripping her tool case, the other carrying a thick, worn notebook wrapped in canvas tape. She reached the firing line without ceremony. The team was already there. No one spoke. They waited, still and steady, as if the cold didn't touch them. Elena set the notebook on the bench, flipped it open to a page marked by sweat and time. Then she placed one hand into the air, fingers loose, eyes closed. You feel it before you see it, she said. Not just the shift in direction, the temperature, the pressure, the silence between gusts. The Barrett rested beside her, locked open, unused. It didn't need to speak anymore. She turned toward the team, letting the breeze catch her collar. We read the wind to know what's coming, not just for the shot, for the moment before it. They nodded, no questions, just watching. At 05:53, Elena stepped aside. The first shooter took position, and the wind, steady and cold, moved through them all.